And welcome. Our top story at this hour: in a historic vote, the U.S. Senate has now approved legislation to temporarily raise the federal government's $28.4 trillion debt limit and avoid the risk of a historic default later this month. The development comes just 2 weeks before the 18th October deadline. The Senate voted 50 to 48 to pass the bill following weeks of partisan fighting. The temporary measure raises the U.S. debt ceiling to $480 billion. U.S. lawmakers, however, will still have to address this issue before the new December deadline to avert a possible default. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has urged the Republican lawmakers to help in bringing a long-term solution to this impending debt crisis.
Republicans played a dangerous and risky partisan game, and I am glad that their brinksmanship did not work. For the good of America's families, for the good of our economy, Republicans must recognize in the future that they should approach fixing the debt limit in a bipartisan way. What is needed now is a long-term solution, so we don't go through this risky drama every few months. And we hope Republicans will join in enacting a long-term solution to the debt limit in December. We're ready to work with them.
Well, before delving further, let's simplify a few points here. What is a debt ceiling, and why is it so important to raise the limit of the debt ceiling? In simple terms, debt limit is the maximum amount U.S. is allowed to borrow to pay its debts. If the amount hits that limit and government doesn't lift the ceiling, U.S. will be unable to pay what it owes and possibly go default. In other words, U.S. government spends more money than it collects in taxes, so it borrows to make up for the deficit. Borrowing is done by the U.S. Treasury through issuing of bonds. So what happens when Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling? The U.S. Treasury then takes up measures like suspending the sales of Treasury securities, suspending investments to compensate for the debt amount. Once all these measures get exhausted and monetary backing depletes, the government is then pushed to the edge of going default. This, however, has never happened in U.S. history. So what happens if U.S. defaults? The situation, if ever arrives, would affect millions of Americans. If the U.S. government cannot pay its bills, millions of Americans will be affected. U.S. troops and federal civilian employees will not be paid. Pension payments would lapse, and Americans on food assistance would see benefits stop. It can also trigger a global recession and collapse in stock markets. Now, coming to this successful debt ceiling increase, this historic bill will now be sent to the House of Representatives for approval before it can be sent to President Biden for his signature. This $480 billion increase, which would lift the debt limit to $28.9 trillion, is expected to be exhausted by December 3rd. December 3rd will also mark the same day when most federal programs expire under a stopgap measure which was passed earlier this month.